Let's talk about one of my favorite topics, which is ethics in the corporate world. So there's this, I don't know, idea that sort of exists out there. Maybe it's an American thing. 600 years of the British guild system, I'm not sure. That like corporations are these special magical institutions that are different from society or exempt in some way, or that they're fancy. I don't know. I can't quite explain it. And there's really no reason for it. The reality is companies can do whatever they want, and as far as like what's important. So for example, a company doesn't need to make money. There are these things called a certified B corporation, and basically what that says is that in the foundational charter of the company, it says, well, yes, making money is important, but also we're not just going to focus on shareholders, but we're also going to take into account stakeholders. So those can be employees, customers, the environment, the community in which the company exists. Like we have to benefit all of those stakeholders equally by law, by like what the foundation of our charter says that we take into account. There's no reason that every company couldn't be like that, and not put profits first. And yet 99% of all corporations, when you look at their charter that, they're basically mandated to follow, it says, maximize shareholder value, right? We're just going to try and make as much money as possible. Now, I'm an economist. I don't think there's anything, look, I'm not here to judge. If you want to make as much money as possible, go for it. But why are companies the way they are? Why are there social norms? When I was in high school, this has changed. When I was in high school, don't get visible tattoos, don't get piercings, don't have your hair cut a certain way because you won't be able to get a job. Now that's changed, but why are companies so traditionally conservative in that way? I just wanted to start by broadening your mind because really a corporation, is just a society. It's a better way to think about a company. It has people and hierarchies and rules and carrots and sticks, and that means society, and that society means norms and rules and ethics, right? So we've made it, okay? So look, this idea that you have a company as a society, once you start thinking about things in that way, then all sorts of interesting new ideas pop up. So I want to talk about the 4 influencers of corporate society and ethics. I also call this the 4 ways to change and maybe stop unethical corporate behavior. Okay, the first is the free market, and for each of these in the full course in the certificate, I give the sort of unbiased opinion, and then I give like the cynical critique. I talked to a bunch of my socialist friends who are pretty anti-capitalist, and really have them like give like the biting, like this is why corporations will always be unethical. So if you're more on that persuasion, don't worry, I put that in the full course for sure. But I just wanted to start with we'll start with the more innocent, non-cynical views of things, and I'll leave the cynicism up to you. So the first is the free market, and the argument for why the free market influences ethics in a corporation goes a little bit like this. If ethics are important to your customers, they will support companies that promote those ethics. If people like your company, they will support it. If they like your story, they will support you. And in the long term, this will lead to better profits, more free market results where the customers will flock to your company. Now, I should say, that's why I said in the long term. In the short term, it may be that being unethical is profitable in the short term. But in the long term, if you look at some of the most well-respected companies, they've been around because their customers really like them. As long as they're not in a monopolistic state, because then that's not really the free market, is it? If you have monopolies. I'm talking in a well competitive environment where you have competitors. There is an argument that if people care about ethics, if the society cares about ethics, then the companies that promote those ethics will be rewarded with more customers. So that's sort of the first big influence on a company. Part two is the government. I think that's pretty straightforward. If the government says you can't do something, that obviously influences corporate behavior. Some governments are more proactive than others when it comes to ethical behavior of corporations, but obviously that's a big influence. The third is corporate leadership. Corporate leadership can be a very strong influencer of corporate behavior. It can set the tone for the entire organization with a strong CEO. Think of the Steve Jobs or Walt Disney, Elon Musk's of the world. So at least while they're at the helm, the company kind of gets imbibed with their ethos in some capacity. Or just the opposite, right? Patagonia is a certified B corporation. I've been talking a lot about certified Bs. Obviously, I like them a lot. And so if you have corporate leadership that mandates, like, we're going to be ethical, like we're going to have 100% renewable energy. And if you're at the top and you're running the company, that's what you get to do, right? So the persuasion and the character and the values of the people at the top, the corporate leadership, can set a direction for the entire company. The fourth big influencer of corporate ethics, which I think is probably the most important, or at least in recent times has been exerting the most pressure and influence on companies changing behavior, and that's the employees. They're in the room where it happens, and companies want the best and brightest talent. I don't think people quite realize how important having really good people is to a large corporation. It's hard, and they spend a lot of money and effort and resources to try and get really great, talented people to work for them. So this requires being a place where people are going to want to work. And that requires appeasing certain broad subset of the population. So that exerts a lot of influence. And don't forget, being in the room where it happens is really critical. If you are an employee of a company and they're about to release a product that you find unethical, you have the ability to, you don't have to stand up and protest, but you could interject and make your opinion known. And maybe you bring that unethical score from an 8 down to a 7, right? Like, you can do things at the margins. Being in the room where decisions are happening is going to be much more powerful than yelling online on some forum. Like, if you're actually an employee of the company, there's going to be a much stronger influence on the inevitable outcome of the company's policies and procedures. Okay. The last big point that I want to talk about is how a corporate policy is made, and I just want to use this analogy that maybe is useful to think about things. So there's inputs. There's all these inputs from all the influencers that I talked about, and those inputs get collected and distilled in sort of these corporate meetings where decisions are actually being made. And in these corporate meetings, they're sort of stamped out. The influences are stamped into physical things, literal things, which is policies, projects, outcomes, results. Like, that's where sort of the rubber meets the road. That's where the influences is actually turned into action, is in these sort of corporate meetings. And so if you want to change the outputs of what a company is doing, if you want to have the company create more ethical products, there's two ways to do that. You can either change the inputs, right, the influences, and change how those are being formed, or change the machinery, right? Like, if you have different policies and procedures about how they're making hiring decisions, for example, it's going to change how those influences get turned into actual results and who they're hiring for certain positions. So that's just a little bit about how I'm thinking about corporate ethics, corporate culture, corporate change. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. It's really hard to keep this short, but I think it's really fascinating. And I hope that you're coming away from this thinking a little bit more about actually, what is corporate ethics? What is the society of the company that I work for? What is that like? And start to see maybe the structures and patterns in a little more of sort of a meta-analysis way. So thanks. Let's talk about the ethics of nudges and behavior change. Nudges is a term that sort of has become widely used now to mean in any old type of behavior change, but a nudge, really, according to Dr. Richard Thaler, who came up with a definition, he views it similar to GPS. Basically, I want to go in this direction, and a nudge, like a GPS, helps me get there. But I can ignore it at any time, and really, it's helping people achieve their own goals. A lot of times when people use the word nudge, they're not talking about helping people achieve their own goals. They're talking about sort of other types of behavior change. So there's this idea called the spectrum of behavior change, from least intense of trying to change behavior to most intense trying to change behavior. Nudges are the gentlest, right? They are trying to help us go where we already want. Gentle little, hey, go here. Oh, hey, go here. Gentle nudges. Next are what's called mandates, okay? Mandates are rules and laws. They mandate a required behavior change, and if you don't follow the rules, there's punishment. So all rules or laws, that's sort of a mandate. That's a type of behavior change. Now, I like to give this example. Nothing is preventing me from not wearing a seatbelt. Okay, the law is I have to wear a seatbelt, but I can go get in my car and not wear a seatbelt, right? There's no physical way to prevent me from doing that. You'd need some sort of police state or something like that. That's a mandate. They punish you after the fact, but it's not as invasive as other types of behavior change. Then we have coercions. Coercion is required behavior change that's not cheap or easy to avoid. If you have too many drunk driving incidents, we install a device in the car called a breathalyzer. And basically, you cannot start your car unless you are sitting in the driver's seat and blow to make sure that you aren't drunk. That's a coercion. Like literally, you cannot drive unless you are sober. So coercions certainly are more intense behavior change. They require basically like we're taking this action and there's nothing you can really do about it. Another example is we'll just say, security at an airport, right? That's a law, yes, that there's security, but you cannot fly unless you fulfill the behavior requirements that is required at an airport. So those are more intense versions of behavior change, coercion. One thing to note is just because it's more intense, it doesn't mean that it's always unethical. It depends on the culture, the society, like what are the reasons or justifications for doing this? What's the outcome if there's not this behavior change, right? You can weigh these different things. So I'm not necessarily saying that coercions are always unethical and nudges are always ethical. But what's important to realize is that with greater force, with greater pressure to change behavior comes greater opportunity that it will be more significantly unethical. The stronger the force, if it is unethical, the worse unethical it's going to be. And finally, the last version, usually this one is unethical, is manipulations. Manipulations are behavior change, but usually with deception, and they're almost always unethical. So they sort of work by changing the facts so that only one type of behavior makes sense. I'll give you the example. Do you know the Nigerian prince scam, email scam? I'm a prince in Nigeria and I have this money and I just need to move it, but I need an American account. So if you just give me your bank account information, I'll give you 1% of the millions that I need to move and you'll be helping me out and you'll be saving orphans. There's this whole thing. Okay. It's a scam, right? It's a scam. But let's take it at its face. If the facts are true, okay, and it really is this person in trouble and they will give you money if you help them out, the correct action is to do what the prince says, right? If the facts are true, that's the reason. That's really the only reasonable behavior in that situation. Of course, they're not true. It's just a scam and they want your bank account information. So the problem with the manipulation, the reason that it's generally unethical, is that it's changing reality. Another version of manipulations is, of course, cults would be like a classic example, right? We're changing the facts, the circumstances of the world to make it appear like only one type of behavior out of these options makes sense. And that's why it's generally unethical because, there's usually a victim involved because of the changing of the facts. So that's the idea of the spectrum of behavior change. Again, I like to think of things not in black and white, but in spectrums. So sometimes, as the pressure ramps up to change your behavior, that's generally going to be seen as more intense and probably should be treated with a little more caution. There's more opportunity for it to be quite unethical as you move further down the spectrum. The last little thing I'd like to talk about here is the idea of a dark pattern. Dark patterns are a term coined by Harry Brignall, and generally they're really interesting. There's a lot of different ways that you can define it. I'm going to sort of skip those. It's just this idea of patterns that are behavior change that are pretty unethical. And they include things like bait and switches, traps, misdirection, disguised ads, hidden costs, privacy infringement. But why are dark patterns so bad? And in the full course, I talk about this at great length. But the pattern here is deception. Okay, these are often manipulations, and the reason they're so insidious though is because they're so small. Yes, it's a manipulation, but unlike a cult where the behavior change requires you to like abandon your family and friends and give them all your money and it's like a big deal, the behavior change is tiny. They're so small that they fly under the radar. Give us your email address so that we can spam market you. When you're giving it, you don't realize you're signing up for all the things, but you are. Like, it's so small because it doesn't really change your life, but it's the exact same. The reason it feels unethical is because it's the same type of behavior change. It's a manipulation that makes it feel so bad. You're going to really find them because companies realize they can have their cake and eat them too. If they revealed the true facts, which is if you sign up for our news, to get this promo code, you're going to be spammed all the time and we'll sell your data to third-party marketers and, X and Y and hidden cookies and all this stuff, you wouldn't sign up. So how can they get people to still sign up and still make the money or get the behavior that they want? Let's use a manipulation where, yes, we're getting people to sign up and we're also getting to do this other thing we don't want. Or we've hidden, hey, the first month is only $20 and then only tiny print, right? It's like, and then auto bill after that at $100 or whatever, right? Like if I just said what the price was, people wouldn't sign up. So you're often going to find these dark patterns, especially in the tech world, at the intersection of we want customers to do this behavior, but we also, if we told them what was really going to happen, they wouldn't do it. How do we get around that? And that's where you find dark patterns, and they're generally unethical. To just keep things in perspective here, those are some of the big ideas about nudges and behavior change, just a way to think about things. Not everything is a nudge, but when you're talking about unethical behavior that you see, especially from companies, generally you're looking at actions that are further along the intensity of that behavioral spectrum.